just to create some space really between Carla's talk, very interesting, and this space. I invite you to get in touch with your body really, your feet on the floor. Just check in a little bit. Palo Santo, sacred wood. At the heart of shamanism is using ritual to move into a different bodily state. For me, what shamanism has, my encounter with it, I'm not a shaman, but my encounters with it, what they've given me, is community, a connection to nature, and ritual, which are three things that are so often lacking in modern life. That's why I just wanted to start this talk with some aspect of a ritual and a bodily sense of yourself in this room with me now. I'm delighted to see you all here. I'm trying to work with myself. I have very nervous excitement and anxiety and energy as I speak to you now. But I really wanted to try, as much as possible, speak from a place that I connect to with ayahuasca, which has been my journey into psychotherapy. So this talk really is all about the connection. I had a 20-year career in technology, and then my boyfriend at the time suggested that we take psychedelics. We had psilocybin and mushrooms in Amsterdam, and then we had ayahuasca. And that, for me, provoked my training as a psychotherapist. So it's very personal for me. And I want to put that within a context that I think that is what is happening in a broader trajectory as well in society, and looking ahead to the next 30 years, what that might mean. The two technologies that are going to make the biggest difference to the next 30 years, in my opinion, are psychedelics and blockchain. Blockchain is the technology that underpins crypto. The title of this talk is that crypto will power the future of psychedelic psychotherapy. A brief explanation, description of blockchain. I only have time for a very brief one, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions and engagement with you. Blockchain is a system for securely sharing a database at its simplest. And you may think, well, what's so extraordinary about that? You know, it's a bit like Google Sheets. It's a bit like a shared spreadsheet or a shared database. In itself, that's it, but there's something very extraordinary about it, which is that there's a lack of a central authority. And if you think, I start to make these existential connections here, and God is dead, and there is a verifiability and transparency to the record with blockchain. So rather than there just being a database, let's say Twitter's database in one place, maybe in a data center, maybe backed up to another data center, with blockchain, the record is on tens of thousands of computers across the world. It's incredibly democratic, fundamentally shared idea of what the truth is. So that's another idea that comes into the philosophy of blockchain, that the reality is just consensus. And that speaks to me when we think about things like psychosis, and as Emmy was saying about what's normal and how we can stand in our non-normality. So an example of blockchain for me would be, I tend to think of President Trump sat there tweeting away. Sometimes he deletes his tweets. He's deleted his tweets 409 times so far, President Trump. There's a website that catalogues them if you're interested. But what that's had to do is create a duplicate, it's had to copy the data to maintain the record. And do you trust that website? What if they added a 410th tweet that actually he didn't? delete. How do you know whether you can trust this website? If Twitter is on the blockchain, then the record is unalterable. And this is protected by advanced mathematics. So it's cryptography, rather than social trust. So if I send some money to someone else across the world, they know that they've got their money, not because someone says it is so, but because it's proven by a process which anybody can check, and it's checkable all the way through, right from the programs that run the whole network. It's all open source and you can inspect it. I don't want to overdo the technology, but I wanted to give you some insight into what I'm talking about when I say blockchain, so that I can ask the next question, which is that individually psychedelics, and maybe some of you may be aware of a psychedelic renaissance. There's lots of studies, Robin Carhart-Harris and Professor David Nutt in the UK, and then looking across to the States, there's things at the California Institute of Integral Studies. They've started a psychedelic psychotherapy training. The Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies in Santa Cruz is now training, I think, 300 therapists to provide MDMA therapy, because they've just reached their target to start phase 3 trials of MDMA for PTSD. Interestingly, I'd invite you to guess how much it costs to run such a trial, a clinical trial of MDMA for PTSD. The answer is $26.7 million. Where does this money come from, if not capitalism, corporations, pharmaceutical? Well, 9 million of it came from a donation from a Bitcoin millionaire. So there's a 5 million of that he gave. Well, we don't know whether he's male or female. Is an anonymous donor set up the Pineapple Fund, and it's donated $55 million over the past. It's going to give away $55 million to charitable interests. And I read an interview with the person behind this fund, and they said that the cause they're most excited about is what MAPS are doing, and it's contributed, a third of this very ambitious target to start testing MDMA for PTSD. So it's a really, really big deal. So that's one way in which crypto is powering the future of psychedelic psychotherapy. Literally, this isn't a speculation for me. It's already happening, and it's happening actually extraordinarily fast. Also recently, psilocybin has been given breakthrough status by the FDA in America. And there are UK connections here which I could make. I'm just starting to become aware of those. They were looking into a clinic on the Isle of Wight to start as a site to start trialing this stuff. So as a breakthrough therapy, that means that it gets a fast track through the bureaucracy of the FDA. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily, it means that it's cleared for research. And that's the big change. R.D. Laing and others in the movements of the 60s were experimenting with all different kinds of psychedelics and altered states of consciousness. And there seems to be, for me, a hiatus between then and now, when the war on drugs occurred and all of this was shut down. And when something is a Class A or a Class 1 scheduled substance under the United Nations rules about this, it means that it has no medical use. It's not even cleared for research. If you're a scientist with all the PhDs in the world, you cannot acquire the substance to do any testing on it, because it's just a done deal. There's nothing more to be said about it. And that is what is now changing with a very international, very diverse group of people. It's the most diverse thing I've ever encountered, and I've come to it through existentialism, and I'll make some existential connections next. But North and South, from South America, ayahuasca is a traditional Peruvian tea, psychedelic tea, and the brew that they make there in a ritual setting, and it's done in group settings. So it's white and it's black and it's old and it's young, it's science and it's religion. It has the potential to really bring this together, and I think there is the challenge of how is it going to hold? How is it going to hold those tensions? But this is the future that I see as I step into, as I emerge from my psychotherapy training, is the thing I'm most excited about. And I'm trying to bring, as I say, my personal story and my professional stories together to see what that can mean. And it's something I invite you to think about as well, is where do you want to be in that? What is your position on this? That's what I'm really interested in. What is it you want to see over the next 30 years? And is there a possibility to mainstream psychedelics in such a way that when we say things like psychology is a Cartesian science, how can you, and I see things like ayahuasca and mushrooms as very much bringing things together. They're very holistic, they're very bodily, they're not separating and analysing. They bring people together in a group, and they bring all of your, for me, you become very aware of the sort of madness in a barrel that's barreling down the hill that's taking place in my own head. And you start to integrate it, you start to see it for what it is, which is this incredibly diverse thing that's within us and beyond us, and it starts to give you a different perspective. And this is, for me, the connection with existential phenomenological psychotherapy, that the mechanism of action is perspective. The mechanism of action is perspective. It's all about what psychedelics have given me is a profoundly different perspective on what I experience as my reality. So, and it does that in a particular way. You could argue that we're sort of different ontological creatures from moment to moment, but I think of the ones I tend to inhabit being a sort of waking state and a sleeping state. So I don't see sleeping as just not being awake. I see it as you just inhabit a different reality for a while. Actually, a third of our lives, let's say, if you're doing all right. And I see the psychedelic experience, the psychedelic space, as perhaps a third category of ontological experience. You can, to some extent, access it through meditation and the sauna and yoga and holotropic breathing. These are all technologies themselves which can get you into, some insights into that sort of space. But I do think that there is something very specific about an interaction with these plant medicines as they're generally considered, not in a medical model kind of way, but as a more simply in a more everyday way, as something that's used for healing. So I think that there are really distinct uses of blockchain and psychedelics that will come together. I've already mentioned one about donations. Very simply, a lot of people got really rich really quickly off Bitcoin and similar cryptocurrencies. There are thousands of cryptocurrencies now. You can make your own. There is Aya coin. There is an ayahuasca specific crypto coin, which is there to launch more or less yesterday its initial token sale, and they're trying to raise money for a retreat centre. They are going to make an economy around this coin, which you can pay for retreats with it, and any profits are reinvested back into the community, so that's something you could look into. There's a note of caution here. I don't want to be too messianic around this. I think there's a real danger of that. I think you've got to keep your head screwed on. You don't want to... I'm trying to, I think, navigate somewhere between hard science and hard hippiedom, I think, with this, and to be somewhere in the middle, being reasonable and thinking, is this really true? That's why I'm wearing a jacket today, as well as a psychedelic t-shirt. That combination I'm aiming for. So, I think blockchain will have it's already had an impact on the progress of psychedelics, and my view is that psychotherapy, and it's certainly existential psychotherapy, has something to offer, and existential phenomenological is particularly suited to this world, and has really, so this is you guys, have something to say, and it could potentially be quite empowering. If you think of, sometimes think of the SEA and existentialists as a community of outsiders. That's how I feel of it. I've always felt like an outsider, being a queer, being a Mancunian, being a certain class. There's things in there for me, and all of you in your different ways will have some aspect of being inside and outside of different circles at different times. And it's about how you can bring those that Venn diagram together. And I think there's a real potential for psychedelics to be part of that, and for this to be. So there are other uses of it that I have in mind. For instance, academic referencing is a simple one. I think that should be on a blockchain. Can you imagine if there's the DOI system, and that's open source, but it's not. That's just held in one place, right? What if that was owned by the people? What if you owned your own article rather than having to? So referencing and publishing. In my opinion, the system of academic publishing is broken. Might edit this bit out of the video, but depending on who sees it. But Taylor and Francis. The whole system of who gets what published is decided in a sense by a sort of oligarchy of 3 or 4 massive publishers. The fact that I have to write stuff for free, but if you want to read it, you have to pay £30. to read an article as a one-off. It's typical, it's absolutely typical of the system as it stands. And I give up my rights to my work, my copyright, as soon as I give it away to some journal or other. And I think blockchain provides the potential for me to own that data, and no one can alter it. And yeah, I can publish another revision of it, but the version is an unalterable chain of events where you can always look and verify what happened. So I think that academic referencing and academic citations and donations are all potential uses of the blockchain that will contribute to psychotherapy and psychedelics. And I'll just say a little bit, only 10 minutes left, so I'll just say the last thing on this, which is about the existential aspects. I think the psychedelic experience for me is often about death. It's about the death of something, death of egolessness, death of an ego, death of old habits. And I think, you have a profound visceral experience of that. I've died 1,000 times, 1,000 lifetimes, and I think the existential perspective really has something very, a conceptual framework that can hold that really well in terms of becoming and being. I think that things about self and no self, and what the self is as a process versus a fixed thing, again, is you have a very visual experience, or at least a tangible experience of that on the psychedelic journey, from what I've seen. If you want to talk about phenomenology, there's nothing more phenomenological than suddenly seeing everything new as if it's for the first time. You talk about the sunlight on Sisyphus' rock, but that is writ large, that you suddenly become aware of the texture of a grape or the particular fibres of a carpet, and you can spend hours with them, exploring them, and it's a really different mode of being. So it really, if you want to really know what it would be like to see the world really phenomenologically, with a lot of bracketing and just as a stream, an endless, infinite stream of perceptions and sensation, then that's what you will get on psychedelics. And otherwise, the main thing, as I've said, is about the perception, the frame of reference, being able to inhabit a different frame of reference. MDMA is known as ecstasy, and we'll bring that back to ecstasis. This psychedelics, MDMA, ayahuasca, ibogaine, psilocybin, in their different ways, mescaline. They offer different ways to step outside of yourself, and yet still be in you. So what is the self? But something steps out of something else, and then is able to look back on it with a different perspective. And I think that is ecstasy as ecstasis, as being able to step outside and take up a different perspective, take up a different frame of reference, is the mechanism of action of both existential phenomenology and seeing things maybe not as they really are, but just from different viewpoints. Being able to move around a thing and look at it and see it differently, and then perceive it differently, and then have a different relationship with it. I think that the experience of being the self for me doesn't end at a kind of skin boundary, and that there's a permeating relationship that goes across all of it, is something that I've benefited from, and it really is something that I hold in my work, even when I'm dealing with a lot of ontic stuff. So there's a risk with this stuff that I'm not like, with clients, I'm interested in what they're bringing and their depression or their what problems they face in their life. But there's always this fundamental perspective I'm also holding in my head as I think of that. So I think crypto will power the future of psychedelic psychotherapy 30 years from now. I hope to be a licensed psychedelic psychotherapist working in the UK. I don't think that is too far a stretch. And I'm very interested, for 6 minutes, to hear your perspectives. Thank you.